Well, the United States is probably one of the most ahistorical countries on the face of the earth. That's for starters. History is not necessarily valued here. We are the newest, in some ways, this is a new world. And we are reinventors, Every time you turn around, there's a new thing, a new meme or whatever about what it means to be a part of this experiment here. So as I said, it's a very ahistorical country, and history, particularly on that K through 12 level, is not generally well taught. The Southern Poverty Law Center did a study recently of how is the civil rights movement taught in K through 12 classrooms, and the results were abysmal. And even though I believe New York State was among the higher ranking of the states, the actual score was by no means actually high. So even the highest scoring states, as far as how the civil rights material was introduced, wasn't objectively of the highest quality. But I just want to say something. We already talked about, Beverly just talked about the visuals and not being able to relate to Harriet, because she seems like someone's grandmother. I mentioned Lincoln already, but then we also live in the era of Django Unchained. And that's just, these are crazy movies. Lincoln is not particularly crazy, but it's not that necessarily that accurate. But the thing is, Django Unchained is a crazy movie, And I have to say, I was prepared really not to like it, really like the movie. And I don't know if I should say why here. You would ask me later. But be that as it may, I knew that I was not witnessing an historical account, I was thinking when Beverly was commenting about how remote the legacy and reality of Harriet Tubman seems to our students, I was thinking about how fortunate that we are, all of us sitting here, those in our age range. We grew up with people whose lives, I'm sorry, this mic is as it is. I'm pinging my P's, and that's just the way it is. And I can hear it, it's annoying to me. But in any event, we of this, our mid-20th century generation, we grew up with people whose lives had been touched by slavery. So my grandmother was born in 1886. That was about 20 years after the Civil War ended. Her mother, obviously, had been enslaved. They never talked about it. But the thing is that I just feel like that my sister and I got an understanding of racial reality through osmosis. They didn't have to talk about it. It was just in the air, I had such a sense of how the world was organized, but also I was growing up during Jim Crow, despite being in the North. So that helped with the consciousness as well. But now we have young people. It's great to have young people and others who say race doesn't matter to them. It's gratifying. It's gratifying to have young people who say sexual orientation doesn't matter to them either. But the thing is that when nothing matters to you, you lose historical grounding.
That's why the Meridians collection of these essays will be so important. Because I don't think that I've ever been to a gathering in which Harriet Tubman was spoken about in these complex, nuanced ways. And that means that we can use this material in classrooms. And then we need a film.
It also strikes me that we haven't been very good at connecting history to our lives. And that's what happens, of course, when you're talking about your great-grandparents, your grandparents. It's connected what you're always talking about in the context of why things are the way they are now. And I think that's one of the things that we begin to lose, those kinds of connections. Helping to organize a conference on human trafficking in Smith. And of course, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 is based on the 13th Amendment, the anti-slavery amendment. And of course, it's the abolitionists, of which Tubman is premier. There's a reason for that amendment, despite Lincoln, of the movement. There's no black, I mean, where are the black, you know. I mean, that's right. Okay, Keckley's 90, and she's like a servant. Instead of this independent figure, right, who may know of Mary Todd's dress. Oh, please, don't get me started there. So how can we make those, how can we better make those connections?
I do think that we have to, I'll get back to Harriet Tubman for a moment. I do think we have to talk about Harriet Tubman in her complexity. I really like the talking about her marital life and her 18-year period as a single person. I also was thinking about Anna Julia Cooper. I mean, I think it's very important for young Ida Wells. That's right. So I think that we have to we need to talk about their political activism, and we need to talk about their courageousness and their struggles, but we also need to talk about their everyday lives and the choices that they made that were transgressive with respect to gender norms and the institution of marriage and all of these other things. And I think that that's one of the ways that we can have students, younger folk, not believe that these women have nothing in common with them. You know, their financial difficulties. I always think about Ida Wells liking to shop and never having enough money. You know, these kinds of things. So I think that there's a way in which these iconic figures, and I think about Coretta Scott King, for example, whom I'm trying to rescue from widowdom. These iconic black women who just seem to be people that have nothing to do with me. So I think that that's part of it.
One thing, Janelle, the conference and the rest of you has just organized it so well in terms of the topics to talk about and to explore. And I love this idea, which was talk about a little bit more about situating Tubman in women's history, how that's we've all sort of worked on, and then we have worked on curriculums and syllabi for women's studies and for particular classes. And one thing, this conference certainly makes me think about looking at something differently within the context of a syllabus and maybe of anthologies and that kind of thing.
One of the things we were saying over lunch, not only is Harriet Tubman not, generally speaking, included in women's studies syllabi, but nor are people even like Anna Julia Cooper or Ida Wells Barnett. So they're these, you know, extremely important, influential women, black women, who were activists and who produced theory, who are absent from women's studies syllabi. And I don't really know why that is the case. Part of it, I think, is there's so much emphasis on contemporary women of color feminizing in women's studies. So the question I think you raised, Vivian, was what would women's studies look like if these women were at the center of what it is that we do when we think about women's studies? It would totally disrupt notions of first wave, second wave. It would totally disrupt notions of feminist theorizing. And I should also say that these women are not in African American studies either. So there are two interventions that we need to make, and I don't even really know where to begin. Most of those women's studies textbooks focus almost entirely on contemporary period, and so I don't know. Even Ida Wells, for example, who for me is one quintessential example of early intersectional theory, doesn't appear in that way.